You're listening to Send This to Your CEO, the B2B Tech Marketing Podcast, presented by 4B Marketing. Explore the world of B2B tech marketing with industry insiders and experts. Our episodes are packed with the latest insights, strategies, and trends to help you stay ahead in this ever-evolving industry. Whether you want to sharpen your marketing skills or keep up with tech developments, we have everything you need right here.
First off, welcome everybody to the webinar today, covering finding and filling cybersecurity jobs in 2025. My name is Sam Grise. I am the Director of Strategy with 4B Marketing. 4B Marketing is a tech channel marketing organization that's focused on business outcomes. Really, our main vision for the company is to be leaders in creating a positive impact every day. So this topic is really close to my heart of, helping people get jobs, finding jobs, and cybersecurity is such an important topic in the world today. To give you a little bit of background on myself, my career was as a seller in the tech ecosystem. So over the past 8 years, I've bounced around from organization to organization. And really the one theme that was constant was cybersecurity growing, right? How do we have cybersecurity attached to all of the solutions that we were selling? And so I know that this has been a key piece of the industry continuing to grow. So super excited about this conversation today and bringing it to you from 4B Marketing today. And so with that, I'm going to introduce my panelist today and co-sponsor, if you will, Brad Rager. So Brad, thank you so much for joining us. But before we dive in too deep, would love to hear your background and what you're doing with Crux.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Great to be here. So I started Crux about 2 years ago. I kind of came at it from the world of, I was in a large security services organization. I ran marketing there, and I'd have conversations with CISOs about their challenges, and usually people-related, talent-related issues were kind of number one on their list. And I felt like there wasn't a lot of creativity and fresh thinking in the way that people were matching folks with job opportunities and really thinking about fit and match. And so that's what we're building at Crux. It's a talent marketplace for cybersecurity, and we work with both candidates and companies to help find awesome people that are a good fit for the culture of the organization, the needs of the role, and really the careers and aspirations for people themselves. So that's what I do, and it's been a fun journey. And yeah, really looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us again. Really excited to pick your brain about the space, especially with what you've been doing with Crux. And before we dive in too deep, for those that are listening in, we do have the Q&A channel open, and I do have the chat open. Sometimes there's a little bit of wonkiness with Zoom. So if it's not going through on chat, put it into the Q&A. If it's not going through Q&A, put it into the chat. We'll be monitoring it and would love to hear some feedback from you as we continue the discussion. So the first piece that I'd like to dive into is the trends in the marketplace. And so one of the things that I mentioned earlier was just how cybersecurity is becoming so prevalent in the marketplace today, right? It seems like it's continuing to grow. Every solution that's being sold, there's some form of cybersecurity being attached to it, right? From a solutions perspective, that's what the technology is. But one of the things that I've noticed is the trends of there's more jobs out there, right? There's more talent out there. We need to fill those jobs from a success perspective to be able to implement those tools and use them properly. But one of the stats that I found kind of interesting was that, there's around 1.2 million cybersecurity employed people in the US today. And really, there's about 450,000 or so open jobs out there. And so I wanted to just pick your brain a little bit about that of, what have you seen over the past couple of years of working at a cybersecurity organization, those CISO conversations that you were having from a job market perspective in the cybersecurity industry?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, those stats get thrown around a lot, Sam, and I'll be fairly direct. I think there's a lot of BS to them. I think that the headline for years has always been there's a shortage of cybersecurity talent. The sky is falling. The hackers are out there. The bad guys are out there. We don't have enough frontline defenders, right? And it's not an entirely untrue statement, but there's a lot of nuance to it. Basically, the dynamic is that there is a shortage of elite level talent, and it's combined with uh, I think a persistent gap in companies actually knowing what they need and in having programs to develop talent. And so the market that we've had for the past few years has actually been fairly lopsided, and it looks like a relative shortage of high-end cybersecurity architects and engineers, and to some degree application security kind of software engineers with a security lens to it, and a relative oversupply of folks in less technical or more junior roles. And I would also say an oversupply in cybersecurity leadership roles. So folks that are trying to break into cybersecurity, it's not an easy thing to do from the ground floor, because really when you talk to employers, what they're looking for, or at least what's reflected on their job descriptions, and we'll get into this, which isn't actually always what they say when you talk to them. But most job postings have pretty healthy experience requirements, and so there's a lot of wonkiness and weirdness in the market. I would say at a high level, trend wise, we've seen a significant softening in demand actually over the past couple of years. Arguably, the market is in a healthier and more balanced place. I think where we were in 2019, 2020, 2021 was not really a sustainable market in terms of demand. You'd have people jumping jobs, cloud security architects and engineers, jumping jobs for $100,000 pay increases. You don't see that in the market today. It is becoming normalized, but there's a lot of room to go in terms of kind of sorting out some of those imbalances. So it has softened over the past couple of years, but I do see, I think maybe we're at a bit of an uptick. I'm seeing some good signs out there in the market that we're starting to get to a better place between supply and demand. But in general, it's been kind of weird market, and anybody that's on the earlier stage would tell you stories about the number of jobs they've applied to, the number of callbacks they've gotten, and the number of interviews they've actually had. I mean, oftentimes you're seeing a really, really, really big funnel to get down to that one job opportunity. But yeah, I mean, that's what I'm seeing at a high level. I'm cautiously optimistic that 25 will be better than 24 and 23, but we shall see.
And that's a great point that you brought up right at the beginning of your statement there, right? Is really that not all jobs are created equal, right? And so when we look at just the holistic numbers that are being published on the internet, which we all know everything on the internet's true. So we have to take it to heart, right? But not all jobs are created equal. Right. And so there are differences between the entry level and, a lot of people trying to get into cybersecurity because of the trend of cybersecurity taking off, if you will, of that's the career path that I want to get into versus a very experienced, tenured, knows what they're doing, tons of certification, so on for that job. Right. There is differences here. And so it's a little difficult to just look at it as a blanket statement of, yeah, there's tons of jobs or there aren't any jobs or there's a bunch of talent or there isn't talent and what that looks like, because that's just the holistic view, if you will, but not all jobs are created equal. But so from your perspective, the trend you're saying in 2025, you're thinking it's going to get to more of a balanced state because of the past few years.
I think so. And it's probably worth talking just a bit about trends in cybersecurity overall, because I think that the job market is an echo of what's going on in security. And I think there's probably a few things that I'm seeing. I'd love your thoughts too. I mean, you're also in this space. I think that, again, kind of going back to that 2020 era, it was a land of very, very healthy and rising budgets, right? And we kind of lived in this world where cybersecurity is an industry, as a budget line item, and companies was growing at like 15 to 20% a year, both on the services side and on the tech side. That's really moderated over the past few years. I think that and that's partly been driven by kind of more normalized levels of ransomware and adversarial behavior. It's been driven by um, the cyber insurance market starting to mature a little bit, though there's still a lot of crazy stuff happening in that space. It's been driven by overall budgetary pressures, and I would say like a lot of economic uncertainty over the past couple of years. And then as security has grown as a budget line item for companies, it naturally starts to get more scrutiny, right? And CISOs in particular are being called on to justify their spend, right? So they're talking about business value, they're talking about risk quantification, they're talking about what are the must-haves, what are the nice-to-haves. They're taking a stronger look at cost and making sure that they're spending the money on the right tools and the right places. They're looking at, what do I do myself? What do I outsource to an MSSP, right? And I think that all has had the effect of, on the vendor side, a lot of pressure on vendors to extend their runway, to reduce their cash burn. On the vendor side of security, you've seen a lot of layoffs that happened maybe 2 years ago. It's still, there's still a little bit out there, but it's certainly, I think, gone through the bulk of the cycle on the vendor side, particularly in go-to-market roles where there was a lot of churn and turnover. And then on the enterprise side, on the practitioner side of security, I think what you've seen is just folks kind of hunkering down, and not as many layoffs that have hit security teams, but people saying, you know what, job market's tough out there. I'm just going to stick this out for a couple of years. Maybe there's not as much promotion and internal movement and things like that. But it's really that overall kind of calming down that has had the impacts on the job market that we've seen. And then I think that, going forward, it probably does put us in a more healthy place. I mean, security should be viewed as an investment, right? It should be viewed as a means of mitigating risk and buying down risk, and it should be thought of in that type of an equation. Unfortunately, because it is a cost center, and because ultimately what drives the cybersecurity industry are companies that make other things and sell other things needing to adopt a cybersecurity posture that reaches the appropriate level of risk. There's always going to be some degree of cost scrutiny. And one of the things that is hard to do in that environment is it becomes hard for the folks that build and run cybersecurity programs in companies to adopt a strategic posture on how they architect their talent pipeline, right? And you need to be of a certain size to say, hey, I'm going to have, a couple of senior people, a couple of mid-level people, some junior people. This is what the career path looks like. And it's because of that there are relatively few entry-level jobs in cybersecurity. And I don't really see that changing. When you talk to CISOs that do have a more strategic posture, that have the budget for a large security program, some of them have had phenomenal success building talent pipelines with relatively junior folk and giving them the experiences that they need to learn on the job. But those are relatively few and far between. So I think one of the other ways to think about cybersecurity is not as its own market and as its own space where you can go and build a career in cybersecurity. It definitely is that. But another way to think about it from a job market perspective is to say that there is technology and there is information over here, and there is securing those assets in that infrastructure that sits right adjacent to it. And you can think about a world, and this is actually on a de facto basis how most people get their jobs in cybersecurity. Relatively few start at a junior level like a SOC analyst or a GRC analyst and navigate their way up. More start as experts or practitioners in something else in technology, and they move over. And that's been the traditional way that folks have gotten into security. And that's a way of thinking about it that I advocate, right? Because I think there is this truth to you can't really secure what you don't understand. And it makes sense to become an expert or go deep in a certain area and then put the security hat on and say, how do I harden that? What are the vulnerabilities? What are the risks? What could somebody exploit, right? And you can apply that to whatever. You can apply that to cloud architecture. You can apply that to software. You can apply that to networks. You can apply that to data. You can apply that to all sorts of things. And that's another way that I think that folks, when they're thinking about an aspiration to be on the security side, can think about career paths in a way that doesn't stop them at some really, really low glass ceiling where they're, trying like hack to get a SOC analyst job and can't find one,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Man, you just touched on so many golden points there, right? that I kind of want to dive into, which will lead us into some of the next talking points. But one is, kind of the macroeconomics or the budget side of things, right? And really what businesses are looking at, and whether we like it or not, it's a capitalistic society. How am I going to drive revenue, reduce cost, reduce risk, optimize cash flow, and optimize my asset utilization? Those 5 drivers are something that we focus on internally when we're speaking with clients, and also how we're portraying that to the market. But really, that's what the business is looking at. And so when they're looking at the cybersecurity side of the house, they're trying to mitigate that risk, right? There's always going to be risk, but how do they mitigate it as much as possible? And so building that team, but also it's money that goes to it. There's a cost associated with it. So how do you find that fine balance of where that gets into? And another piece that you touched on that I loved is, kind of the back channeling into security, as opposed to the entry level way in, which seems like it makes sense. Perfect. I want to be in cybersecurity. Great. I'm going to look for cybersecurity jobs. But really, what are they protecting is the technology or the assets that they need to understand what they do and what the value is there, because that's helping drive the business forward. How do I mitigate risk with that? Which is a great way to truly get into the space, because you're bringing value to the business of, I understand this technology. I know what's going on. These are the vulnerabilities. Here's how we can go solve for it. That helps you stand out in the job market like crazy, of this is what I can do, and this is how I can go solve for that problem. And kind of bringing it back a little bit to the budget side of it, a question that I have for you is the timing, right? I always hear this all the time. Well, the timing's not right for the job market, or we're coming into a spending freeze because of the holiday season and stuff like that. And another component of that is with the budgets of them saying, hey, maybe we want to outsource to an MSSP, or maybe we want to do contract to hire or full-time hire. What is your perspective on that kind of heading into 2025? I think that MSSPs are going to continue to grow, but they still need their own internal security teams to augment and work with that MSSP. But what does that look like from your perspective as contract work versus full-time hire with the macroeconomic craziness that we have going on? We just finished an election cycle, right? So who knows where that's going to bring an impact, but would love to hear your perspective on what that looks like moving forward.
Yeah. I think the first thing I would say is that anybody forecasting with confidence doesn't know anything. I think there is just more uncertainty in the world than we like to give credit. And with respect to the point of folks trying to time the market, I think a healthier way to look at it is what's in your control and what's out of your control. And market timing is always out of your control. And market timing is also, it's meaningful to the experience you're going to have when you're in the job market, but it isn't everything. And it absolutely isn't something that you can control. And it's probably not something that you can forecast with much confidence. So rather than sweating timing, I think that and we'll get into, advice on finding a job, but the TLDR on that is it's all about networking, and networking is Generally not something that you want to flip on and flip off. Like you can do that, but it's much less effective if you have it at some level always on.
Mhm.
And so I would say don't sweat the market. That all being said, I'll tell you my thoughts, but again,
Yeah.
I'm not sure they're worth much, right? Um, I do think from a macro perspective, things seem to be pretty bullish right now.
Mhm.
I do also feel like there's a lot of uncertainty out in the world, so that bullishness could flip. I think it in a relatively fragile way, but we don't know. It does feel like budgets are going to be a little bit better going into 25 than they were in 23 and 24. And I think when folks think about budgets, on one level, they look at people, process, and technology altogether, and we'll look at cybersecurity spend and say, what do we want to ramp up? What do we want to bring down? Security leaders are always looking for ways to automate work and make sure that the human talent that they have can be focused on the highest value things and fill in the gaps that technology can't solve. So there's always going to be that kind of trade-off. Generally, I feel that security leaders feel that it's the human capital that's more scarce than the technology. The technology is abundant. The people are not. It's particularly when it's like, hey, I need somebody that knows this tool that can do this job. Again, it pushes a lot of those skills up to the higher order skills rather than the kind of entry level and basic skills, which has its own questions for like how we shape cybersecurity talent. But like, let's put that off to the side. Um, that being said, I do think there are budgetary dynamics that can make alternative roles or alternative entry besides just a full-time job an interesting thing to pursue, right? So frequently in companies, you have lots of controls around hiring people. And in bringing on an FTE often triggers different levels of approval and scrutiny than bringing on contractors. And I do think that over the past couple of years, you've seen a bit more use of contractors and a bit more fluid use of contractors and a bit more fluid use of MSSPs than kind of FTEs. And that's part of what's caused that kind of freezing in the job market. I don't think that's going to change. And I really do advocate, contract to hire, try before you buy, make sure there's a fit both ways type of a philosophy. I think it's good for both candidates and companies to kind of think that way because you never know 100% of the data that you want to know in an interview process. Um, I am long-term bullish on MSSPs and outsourcing. I just think that at the end of the day, companies don't want to be in the cybersecurity game. That is not what they do. That is not what they make. It is a necessary evil, and the migration will happen to whatever is cheapest, whatever is at that frontier of what's cheapest and most cost efficient, right? And kind of easiest to manage. And as security matures, if security can be done better on the outside looking in than on the inside, um, that's a very attractive proposition, right? And so for folks looking to build careers, building it on the services side, whether that's a professional service and a project-based thing or a managed service and it's continuous, I think those are great avenues for folks to explore. And I think we will continue to see growth and interesting things happening in that side of the market.
Awesome. Awesome. Great insight. You led us into our next topic, which is, some tips and tricks to be able to stand out and how you get into the job market, if you will, and how you do that. And, my favorite piece that you brought up, and as we were talking, getting ready for this, was the networking side of the house, right? I think that is so, so important because a job listing that goes out on LinkedIn, we've all seen them, right? The description, you're like, well, hang on, they need 15 years of experience. You've got 150 applicants. How do I stand out? and LinkedIn does the thing where it's like, you've got 8 of the 9 qualities that they're looking for and so on. And so the networking side to me is so important, right? Who do you know? How are you building relationships? And one of the biggest things for networking, in my opinion, is bringing value into that relationship, even if it's just grabbing a coffee, or how can you help somebody else, right? And personally, for us at our business, it's living that positive business outcome or positive impact every single day, right? How can you help people from a networking experience? But would love to just pick your brain a little bit more about other tips and tricks. Obviously, the networking side, want to get your opinion on it and some ideas there. But anything else that you have around, how do you stand out? How do you make an impact so people know, hey, I'm Sam Grise and I'm the one that you should be hiring?
Yeah, 100%. So maybe we'll take that at a couple of different layers, right? So if you take it to the most basic thing, there's a job to be done, and that job gets distilled in a job posting. And that posting gets put out into the world, and it describes a job to be done for a company. And then a candidate has their equivalent, which is a resume and slash a LinkedIn profile. Mm-hmm. And at its most basic level, the way it should work is you have this universe of potential applicants matching up against a job description. The reality is that is super messed up and not well functioning today. That matching in that marketplace, and it's because job descriptions are poorly written. Companies oftentimes don't. They will cut and paste faster than they will actually think through what they need. Then those job descriptions get sent to junior recruiters who don't actually understand the job to be done, and they're just going off of matches between qualifications and requirements. And that's after it goes through an applicant tracking system, which will rank candidates based on keywords between those two things. And so there's a lot out there on the internet about like, how do you hack this matching that's happening? How do you beat the AI? How do you beat the ATS? How do you, and there's you can fall into subreddits on this stuff, and that's all fine, right? Like, people do find jobs that way. There is some clearing of the market that happens. You can go think about how to optimize your resume. And you do want to have a good resume. You don't want to have a lousy one. You do want to make sure that you're bringing your accomplishments to life. You do want to think about the fact that skills now are something that get explicitly rendered through an ATS, and how do you make sure they pop? But I always say, like, take that to the 80-20 rule, know where it's good enough, but don't waste your cycles on endless applications and endless gaming and refinement of your resume, particular to every single job, because it is the numbers in the numbers game that is not working in your favor. It's that 150 applicants, right? It's the fact that, a lot of the jobs never actually end up getting filled for one reason or another. So that is not if people are thinking about where do I put my energy, and we all have a discrete number of hours in the day, that is not where I advocate people put their energy, right? The way you're most likely to find your job is through your network, is through some human connection and some human conversation. And part of that is actually a reaction to how badly that first thing that we were talking about is working today, right? Mm-hmm. So referrals matter a lot in the market that we're in today. And having somebody who can say, oh, hey, you should talk to so-and-so, that bubbles you up to the top of the list. All of a sudden, you're not competing with the 150 people that drop their resume on LinkedIn, or the 500 people. You're competing with one or two other people that may have also been referred, right? And so then the question is, how do you get referred into a job opportunity? Well, one, if you have a large network and people that know you and people that like you, naturally you're going to get opportunities from that law of large numbers, and you'll see things that way. The other way is to try and get yourself referred in, and to strategically network in around certain companies and certain opportunities. So The advice that I give to folks is have a list of target companies. And that can seem a little bit unusual because outside looking in, you don't know that much about a company. Let's say you want to be a SOC analyst, like does it really matter what company it's at? A job is a job. But that is how you can run a process to find a job in a strategic way because it gives you something to focus on and something discrete to build a network on. So use the job boards to understand who's hiring and then use LinkedIn and use your network to go try and have conversations with folks that work there. And then think about how do you stand out, not from the resume perspective, but from the human perspective, right? What's the story that you're telling? What's the value that you can bring to those people in those conversations? What's the narrative you have on where you've been and where you want to go? And have that elevator pitch really super tight. Like you should be able to say in 15 seconds what you're all about and where you want to go. And you will find that people are totally open to help. But having a warm introduction, having a human connection, having somebody say, yeah, this person seems pretty cool. They're really nice. They're smart. They seem to be hardworking. That goes a long way. And I think those are the things that distinguish folks at the end of the day, much more than, fine tuning the resume to the 50th degree or adding, additional layers of certs. I know we're going to talk about certs, and certs are good, but certs don't equal jobs. At the end of the day, the human stuff matters a lot more.
Yeah, great points there. And, one of the things that I always think about from a networking perspective of something that I did early in my career of trying to find a job and where I wanted to go next was even people outside of my network, I asked for help. And it wasn't, hey, can you help get me into this company? It was, hey, Jimmy Smith, you have a job role that looks like something that I want to do in the future. Would you mind just giving me some guidance on how you got to that role, what you studied, how you built that relationship, or so on? And 9 times out of 10, people want to help. We're human, right? We want to help people. And so if your network is small, right, don't be afraid to go on LinkedIn and find people that have that role that you're looking for and message them and ask them for help. They're more than willing to help most of the time, right? And so that's how I did it. And so it seems like your perspective on that's the same of, build those relationships, ask for help, be vulnerable and say, hey, I'm looking for this kind of role. How did you get there? And so I see your head nodding. So it seems like we're on the same page there.
That's totally right. And that's like, I would say the digital realm, right? Like in the digital realm, go talk to people that do what you want to do. Go talk to people that work in companies that you want to work in. Ask for advice, but try and think about how you could give back in those things too, right? And be open. And don't frame it as I want a job from you, because that's like the equivalent of selling, right? Like, but frame it as, hey, you seem like you know a lot about this space. I'd love to learn from you, right? And people kind of like that and like to give back. I think that's the strategy on the digital side. And then I think there's the local in-person side too. And what's the phrase, like 90% of life is just showing up? Like show up to the things, go to the meetups, there's a ton of cybersecurity networking groups and meetups that are around, both informal ones that are kind of organized on like Meetup, or ones that are a little bit more formal and part of chapters and organizations like ISSA, Cloud Security Alliance. Go to those events, meet the people there. These organizations are desperate for volunteers and help organizing events. Like be that person that shows up, that contributes, that helps organize the events, that lines up the speakers, that, figures out who's going to do the catering for the happy hour. And you will meet people that are senior folks in your market, in your industry, and in places where you could go, it might be an in-person job, but you know what? 80% of the world is now. and they're going to be the people that could be your employer. And if they see somebody who's hardworking and eager, like that goes a tremendous way. So I think it's both the LinkedIn and the digital and kind of the remote conversations, but also the local ones. Go to Tech on Tap and meet folks that are there.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate the plug there. That's great. But yeah, that's exactly why we started the happy hour, was connecting the community, right?
Yeah.
And the way that I look at the IT community, not just cybersecurity in general, but we're all working together in one facet or another, right? Whether we're competing on selling a product, but then 6 months later, we could potentially be acquired, right? We could be working together, right? And that's really the point of connecting the community and helping network to build those relationships, which is awesome. And now on to the next point. I'm not a technical guy. And so I've always heard certifications. And as a seller in the space, that was something that we always hung our hat on, is we've got the best engineers with the certifications that can do X, Y, and Z. You know, it was like kind of the gold standard, if you will. Would love to hear your perspective as somebody in the job market looking for, you know, a role, either it's higher level or entry level. You know, you said it earlier, certs don't equal jobs, but would love to hear your perspective on kind of the certifications and what that means in the job market.
So nobody will hire you because you have a cert, but somebody who is looking for a person with a particular set of skills may feel more confident that you can do the job if you have a cert. And so what I say to folks is, like, motivation matters here. If your motivation for getting a cert is to bolster your resume, that's the wrong motivation, and I don't think it's going to work. If your motivation for getting a cert is truly born out of a genuine curiosity and desire to learn a space or deepen your skill set, it is the learning first and the fact that you can put it on your resume second that can drive impact, right? And there are, you know, definitely certs within certain disciplines that you go onto our website and look at any one of our quarterly reports. I publish a chart of the most kind of in-demand certs that employers are asking for by segment of cybersecurity. And what I would say is, like, if you're interested in going deep in cloud security, absolutely, you know, go to the Cloud Security Alliance and get the certified cloud security practitioner, right? If you're interested in broad leadership and having a full overview of cybersecurity, and you want to reach that kind of CISO and team leader, work towards your CISSP, right? That is absolutely the gold standard for a generalist security degree. There's a number of offensive security certs and ones that get very, very specialized, right? If you're in to OffSec, there's some great options, but do it because you're in a space, you're intrigued by it, and you want to learn things that you don't already know. And I think goodness follows from that. Not necessarily because I think that it will be inauthentic, and nobody looks for somebody that has 25 certifications, right? Somebody that has a lot of certifications, maybe it's just because they love to learn, and that's okay, and that says something about you, right? So that's kind of how I think about it, and you know, I don't think that when you look at where certs sit on job descriptions, they are usually in the preferred section rather than the required. So don't look at it as a barrier. Look at it as an opportunity, and make sure it's one that's balanced in your time portfolio relative to other things.
Love it. Love it. I think the importance of, doing it for you, if you will, because you're interested in that, right? As opposed to, hey, I need this certification because of X, Y, and Z is a big difference, right?
Yeah.
Of value you're going to be bringing to the organization as well. And it leads us into the next point, as you mentioned, kind of on the job listing, the preferred section of some of those things, right? I'm on email lists. I see things about job listings all the time for opportunities, and whether it's LinkedIn or Indeed and contract to hire and all over the place, but would love to get your perspective on, when those things are published, because I know from my experience, once it's published on LinkedIn, a lot of times I felt like I was behind the game, right? Like the networking side, the creating of my opportunity for myself, a little bit behind the game, but wanted to get your perspective on a couple of different pieces, because I've seen some job listings that are outrageous with salaries, right? Just super, super high. And I'm like, wait a second, and not in the cybersecurity space, but in one, $800,000 a year for a marketing director. And I'm like, that is not real, right? Like, what's
Yeah. Yeah.
but would love to get your perspective on that from those job listings that are going out, how to spot a good job listing if people are applying that way. What are the goods and bads, both from a hiring perspective of how do I make my job listing stand out, but also from somebody that's looking for a job of, yes, that actually looks like a real job that they're going to be hiring for. The description's accurate. Would love to just, get your perspective on what those kind of best practices are.
Yeah. So maybe we'll take it first from the employer side, and then we'll look at it from the candidate side. On the employer side, I mean, there's definitely, I have my kind of pet peeves, and, I can get on my soapbox around crappy job listings, of which, 80% of job postings probably in my mind fall into that category. And, I think that the problem is that people kind of pencil whip this, or they hand it to their HR team, or they cut and paste from the last thing, or they hop into GPT, and they don't really spend the time to think through, what are the outcomes I'm looking for? What is the work that needs to be done? What are the skills that are necessary to complete that work well? What can be taught and what is innate? And then how do I reflect that on a job posting? And you end up getting kind of a mess of things where maybe there's a lot of, the work that's listed that doesn't actually reflect the nature of the job. But I think the biggest issue is long lists of required qualifications that aren't necessarily great proxies for the real skills that are needed, right? And part of that is because oftentimes a lot of those real skills that are needed are things that are difficult to assess outside in until you start talking to a candidate and getting to know them, right? You can write excellent communication skills. You can try and think of a proxy for how smart somebody is and how quickly they learn. But the reality is you can't codify that in a clean way in a job description or on a resume necessarily. So what you get are must have 5 years working with this particular technology, right? You get entry level jobs that require a CISSP, which, by the way, you have to have like 5 years of working experience in cybersecurity to get your CISSP, right? Like you get all these things that just don't make sense. You get, VP level jobs. It's great you see ones where the comp is high. I'll often see ones where the comp is low, right? And you get analyst level salaries on VP level jobs, right? And just I think it more than anything else, it speaks to a lack of thoughtfulness in terms of what's going on there. And so that's it on the employer side. Is really my encouragement is think through the outcomes you need, think through what you really need, recognize that whatever you say is probably going to go through some literal interpretation layer when somebody is doing the screening for you, particularly if it's an internal recruiter, and be mindful and thoughtful of that, and treat your job description as a marketing tool in the sense that like you actually want to try and get somebody excited about it. So that would be the first thing I would say. And then on the candidate side, if you're playing the game of of applying and paying attention to the market that way, first thing I would say is think about it first and foremost for intelligence rather than particular opportunities. So look through the job descriptions, look and see who's hiring, right? Who has a lot of job openings, who seems to be active, who's posting new ones and closing down old ones, implying that they're filling jobs and actually hiring people, right? That's a great proxy. Who's writing good job descriptions? Who's writing lousy job descriptions, right? That can inform the companies that you want to work with and talk to. And then know that timing matters. So the first day or two after a job is posted, those are the most important ones. And if the company is actually getting their candidates that way, and a lot of them don't, but if the company actually is, the people who drop their first applications are going to be in the best shape, particularly if there's a lot of them, right? Because they'll fill up, some number of screening conversations, they'll fill up interviews, and when you're 2 weeks late to the party, you may not be in that batch. So pay attention to that. But again, I'd say it's not probably going to be a winning game. I'm not saying it doesn't work out for some people, but I just don't think that's the door that most people walk into their jobs through. And as a recruiter, I will say oftentimes, the best talent is not always the talent that is looking at a given moment, right? So there's also that which happens, which is, the tapping on the shoulder type of a thing. And that's as true in this market as it is in other markets. Although I would also say at the same time, there is great talent out there that's looking right now, great talent and better talent than there was 5 years ago, for sure. For sure.
I love that. And I love the concept of using the listing as a job hunter more as a resource of who's hiring. Are they closing down those job descriptions? Are they getting filled? Is it a solidly written job description based off of the outcome like you're talking about? Because you're learning more about the organization as a whole as well of somebody that you would work for. So using it more as a resource, of course, right? The 80-20 rule, like you mentioned, right? Of, applying, but really where should our time be spent probably to be the most effective to fill that role. But really, I'd never thought of using it more as a resource of, what is the trajectory of the company? Are they closing down those job descriptions? Are they filling those roles? What does that look like? So that's great insight there. And so it moves on to kind of our next topic, if you will, of, resources, where can people go? And we've touched on it a little bit of, kind of the networking groups that we've talked about, the meetups, being a part of Cloud Security Alliance, those kind of items, Tech on Tap we've mentioned, but would love to pick your brain as well of just any other job boards or, areas that people can be networking or thinking about additional resources for individuals that are looking for those jobs. Yeah.
Well, it's funny, I say all these semi-negative things about job boards, and I actually run one. So at Crux, we have a job board for cybersecurity jobs. There's at any given time about 2,000 job opportunities that are out there, and you can sort by the remote or on-site location, domain of cybersecurity. It's a great tool to see who's hiring. Obviously, to find particular opportunities, check out salary ranges, compensation, look at what folks are asking for. It's a great research tool, and also, I think, a good tool if you're in the market. And we curate them, right? Like we will eliminate a lot of the ones that we think are fairly junky. So, there's so many resources. There's lots of discords that are out there for folks that are in market and, looking to network. So discords, Slack channels, local meetups, local resources, local communities. Think about where you want to specialize. Think about what you're interested in. I guarantee you in the market that you're in, there's probably some in-person opportunities, and certainly more broadly, there are sub-communities of folks that are practitioners, many of whom are just doing it because they like meeting people and they want to give back and they want to provide advice. Go to those places and build relationships. It just starts with a, hey, how are you? Nice to meet you. hop on a Zoom, have a chat, and who knows where things go from there. Who knows where things go from there.
Love it. Love it. And you mentioned something that I didn't ask yet, but I do have a question about it, is the remote work. It's been changing a lot, right? Obviously with COVID, 100% remote. Now we're seeing companies push back to, come into the office, hybrid model, so on. Is there any trend with that with cybersecurity for remote work versus in office? Obviously, they're in the business of protecting data and so on. So classified access, potentially, especially if you're working towards the federal side of the business or SLED side of the business. Any trends you see with that?
Yeah, that's actually something we track relatively closely, and the trends have pretty uniformly been towards back in office. So you've seen, in my stacked bar charts, the pure remote has kind of been shrinking. Hybrid's been a bit stable. Full-time in office is growing, and part of that, frankly, is a function of where there are a lot of cybersecurity jobs, which is a function of where is there a fair amount of cybersecurity budget. And you see industries like financial services and healthcare, they kind of spike on, like, they have large cybersecurity teams, and you have a lot of bosses in those areas that are like, we want butts and seats. And I know a lot of people in the financial services world, and they're sitting in offices, even if they're doing pen testing and they're, ostensibly trying to get into networks from the outside, they're doing it from an office. And I think that's just where the world has swung back to, and employers have generally had the bargaining power more so over the past couple of years. I think it's normalizing. But the other thing I would say is you see it in compensation too. Fully remote jobs, like for like, pay less than hybrid and on-site jobs because there's more people that want to do that work, and those can be pretty competitive. So just all things for folks to know.
Totally. Great insight. I'm one of those psychopaths that loves being in the office. I know I'm remote today, but the reason why I'm remote is so we can have a good conversation without distraction sometimes. I love being in the office because you learn so much more sometimes.
Yeah.
Hearing other conversations and so on. But yeah, great insight. So wrapping it up here, kind of final thoughts. I've got a ton here. One is the networking side of it, right? Sell yourself, right? Build those relationships. Another big aspect of that is the certs aren't going to get you a job necessarily, right? Those are components, but have the value of why you're going to be doing that, not just doing it to do it. Not all jobs are created equal. So when we look at some of those stats that you're going to hear online or you're going to hear on the news and so on, it depends, right? Those entry-level jobs that we've talked about, right, being more saturated, if you will, the more experienced job being less saturated, right? Not all jobs are created equal. And network your way in, right? Network your way in, build relationships, and bring value to the business. One of the favorite things that you said today that I really enjoyed is, if you have a technology that you love, how do you secure it, right? How do you get it to that security state? That's a great pathway in to break your teeth, if you will, into cybersecurity. So would love to open it up to you for final thoughts as well.
Yeah, I think those are good ones. I mean, I would just say get out there and be out in the world. And look, this is an industry that skews a bit more on the introverted side, and that can be hard for folks, right? And it can be easy to want to kind of sit behind your computer and manage it in a fully digital process. And I just think it's a hard game to play out there. And I would say if you can put yourself in an uncomfortable position, if it isn't natural to do the networking, that's not a bad thing, because that will help you grow in ways that are going to benefit your career more broadly. At the end of the day, the more senior you get in any organization, the more, whether you want to sell or not, everybody sells at some level. And learning how to sell yourself and to build relationships and build trust is a good learning process to go through. It's not always an easy one, especially if that's not your natural inclination, but it's a worthwhile thing to do, and it's a pretty necessary thing in this job market. So,
love it. Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Really do appreciate it. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. shoot me an email. I'd love to help, right? From a networking perspective, as you may be starting this journey, anything I can do to help. As I mentioned, our vision is to create a positive impact every day. So shoot me an email with the subject line cybersecurity, and would love to connect with you, grab a coffee, and help out any way we can. But big thank you to Brad for joining us today, bringing the insight into the space. But Brad, anything you would like to add?
I think we're good. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on, Sam.
You've been listening to Send This to Your CEO, the B2B Tech Marketing Podcast. Tune in next time for more insights and strategies to stay ahead in B2B tech.